Nathan, would you just like to introduce yourself to our incredible audience? Let them know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. So, my name is Nathan. Yes, I have a postgraduate degree in social work and in social work assessing. I also have a master's degree in the moving image, and I currently have a social enterprise called Neuro Expression, which is about empowering neurodivergent people, neurodivergent communities, and neurodivergent artists. I'm also twice diagnosed with dyspraxia, and there's also suspected ASD and OCD.
Yeah, because as we know, co-occurrence is more common than not, right? So often we're not always privileged to be able to get all of those diagnoses, but with one often would come another. So
In-
thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. So you founded Neuro Expression, which you mentioned. You're obviously passionate about helping people within the community. Community, I mean those who've been locked out of the system or process because of their neurological makeup or their background, right? Could you just tell us a little bit about that personal journey with dyspraxia, ASD traits, OCD. You know, what led you to go from getting the diagnosis and the understanding to thinking, I need to help others, right? I need to remove some of these barriers for other people.
yeah, sure. So I think early on there was a suspicion that I was neurodivergent, but that neurodivergence was never specified. Um, Even though I had some tutelage when I was younger, some home tutelage that my mother paid for. But basically, when I went to university, there was a suspicion that I had something, but that something had not been identified. So when I went to university, they openly promoted the idea of getting a diagnosis, and they openly promoted that there was support if you were neurodivergent. Of course, those I wasn't familiar with that word at the time. So I went to see an educational psychologist. I booked an assessment. It was a fairly straightforward assessment. And I thought maybe there might be some dyslexia or something of that nature. And then when the assessment was finished, and obviously when the educational psychologist had made their summary, they concluded that I had dyspraxia. So I guess that's when it began. I was someone who had dyspraxia. And then I guess the first question then is, what is dyspraxia? And it's funny because I didn't ask myself that question initially. I was more interested in the initial support that I could get from my university because I had the strong intentions of getting a degree. So I did that, and then um, in doing my social work qualification again, I didn't need to get a diagnosis then, but then I went through the process in terms of the support that they offer. And I think generally, I think universities are more far ahead with their support for neurodivergence rather than a lot of work companies. So after doing that, I went into the work industry, and if I'm honest, that there was some struggles there, but in that process, I learned about access to work. I learned about reasonable adjustments, and then I would say there was a point after working for about 10 years that I felt that I needed something more. I felt that there was some purpose that needed to be done. I didn't know what it was, but you got the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, clothing, and shelter, but then there's like spiritual enlightenment at the top, whatever that means. Um, so basically, I then did a master's in moving image. And once I did that master's in moving image, I then had this idea of having a neurodivergent black mixed race exhibition, but I needed to get funding. So this led to the path of trying to get funding. I failed the first time, but then I got it the second time. And I had this idea of not only promoting neurodivergent artists, but also paying neurodivergent artists. And that's why the funding was essential. So once I did that, I then had this idea or redeveloped the idea of what does a neurodivergent friendly world look like? And how could I be a part of creating that neurodivergent friendly world? And that enabled me on my journey to create Neuro Expression. Then again, there's different types of businesses. I know you would know this, Theo. There's different types. There's LLCs, there's sole traders, there's social enterprises. And for me, it wasn't just about money. Of course, we need money for things to function, but it wasn't about money. It was primarily purpose driven. So this led to, forming Neuro Expressions. And one of the things about Neuro Expressions is about empowering neurodivergent artists. Also, it's about paying neurodivergent artists because I realized that there was a gap in the market where there was a study done by another organization, forgive me, I can't remember their name, but it said 87% of neurodivergent people are not paid for their work. So there was an expectation of their work without being paid. So I wanted to be the difference in that. But that meant I had to go for more grants. So I went for a second grant to create what I would deem a neurodivergent friendly exhibition. And I was successful in getting that grant, and that's going to exhibit five different neurodivergent artists. We'll provide them reasonable adjustments. They'll be paid. And also, there will be a digital, virtual reality element for people that have physical disabilities that maybe can't attend, but will still be able to experience the exhibition. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, it did. It's lovely. Well, just as a little side, why the visual arts then? Because to go from being a social worker and from seeing some of your background and hearing you talk earlier, it seems that is a great route for you to do some work in. To then shift to visual arts, and I get it. It's like it is finding there is something else missing that you want to do. Why visual arts?
Let me clarify that. Again, I need to clarify the beginning. So even though I qualified as a social worker and I qualified as a social work assessor, I didn't actually do social work, and there's a reason for that. Because of dyspraxia affects the fine motor skills, right? So the fine motor skills are the hands and the fingers, which means if you're trying to drive, your fine motor skills are essential. And because I have issues in these areas, I wasn't able to drive, which meant effectively at the time, because I didn't understand what access to work was and what reasonable adjustments was, I could not get a job in the industry, even though I tried to go through various agencies. And that led to me going into a project worker slash senior support worker role. And I went into supporting people that had addiction, like substance abuse, homelessness, dual diagnosis, and they were very enlightening experiences. But I guess there was always a creative element in me. I come from quite a creative family, and I just wanted to tap back into that. And ironically, social work was about providing social benefit, but it was also about taking the safe route in terms of having like a stable wage. And I got to a point where I had really nothing to lose. So I just thought, what, I'm going to go with my heart and I'm going to go with what I want. And what happened was, it was quite funny because I saw the advert for the Masters, and then for some reason, I was watching documentaries on Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Jean-Michel Basquiat is considered the king of Neo Expressionism, which is basically a certain style. It's a very, very unique style of drawing, and I was very drawn to that. And that really spoke to me. And also, I was into doing whiteboard animations, and I was very much into explainer videos for neurodivergent people. So I just felt that there was something there creatively for me. And because I did a master's in moving image, I was surrounded by some creative people. So it was fostering that energy. So it made sense that I would create something that, yes, would have maybe a bureaucratic element to it, but also would tap into that creative thing that was innate. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people are very creative. So yeah.
That's fascinating. So, and I agree, there's a huge amount of creativity in ND talent for sure. And actually, your story is not unique. It is unique, of course, to you, but in terms of many of us, like almost waking up one day, and this might happen 10 times over, right? And going,
Mm,
hang on a minute, there's something missing, right? And I'm going to run
yeah.
off in that direction or this direction. And often there's a big driver to help others as well. So
Mm.
on that perspective, like with all of that to consider, uh, is that your ambition then to be able to find mechanisms locally, nationally, to be able to provide a platform for individuals within these creative spaces that haven't had that platform before? Is that the major driver from a social enterprise perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's multifarious in the sense that on one hand it was about platforming neurodivergent artists. That was definitely a big part of it. But then it was trying to get feedback from the neurodivergent community. And then also it's about trying to promote some awareness and knowledge to the neurodivergent community as well. There is something I would like to share. For example, one of the final pieces to my puzzle was I read a book. I don't want to butcher this, but Temple Grandin, I believe, is a professor that is autistic, and she wrote a book. Um, I think the book's called Visual Thinking, but I may have butchered that. But there was an important point she made in that book. And in that book, she said that the educational system is geared towards verbal thinking. So when we take a test, it's all verbal thinking. I think, therefore I am. That's verbal thinking. But the issue is that neurodivergent people are predominantly visual thinkers. So that means because the educational system has a preference to verbal thinking, that means that the neurodivergent people who are visual thinkers are at a substantial disadvantage. When I read that, that to me was like the final piece to say, yeah, there's a lot of untapped talent and a lot of people are not getting the opportunities, and there's various reasons for that. A lot of it is ignorance. People don't understand. A lot of neurotypical people do not understand neurodivergence. They don't even may not even understand the learning styles. Why would they if they're verbal thinkers? So yeah, part of it is about platforming neurodivergent artists, but a big part of it as well is I would want to, I want to promote the idea of accessible formats. So these are materials that are accessible for neurodivergent people. I definitely want to promote the idea of reasonable adjustments and also access to work. And the other part of the social enterprise, which is facilitation for different types of companies like councils and things like that, that's what I try and do. I try to promote the idea of a neurodivergent friendly workspace.